Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is a Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth event, and we have a very special panel with us this evening to talk about a subject which I know is close to many people's hearts around the Commonwealth, and that is the subject of girls' education. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Sunil Sharma, who will be hosting most of the evening. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Paul. We have an all-star cast I think even Martin Scorsese would envy. We have Kim Campbell, 19th Prime Minister of Canada. She's the first and only woman to hold that position. We have Helen Grant, our Parliamentary Chair, and recently the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education. We have Dr. Patricia Watson, the Chief Director Social Inclusion and Partnerships in Education, Department of Basic Education in South Africa. And we also have Mike Lake. He sits on an executive committee at the International Parliamentary Network for Education as a Northern American representative and is a Canadian MP. I'll pass it over to Mike to say a few words, and then we'll go into the sort of moderated Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. It's such a pleasure to be here and have this opportunity. I'm calling in from my basement here in Edmonton, Alberta, in Canada. I'm a 15-year member of Parliament with the Conservative Party here, and really looking forward to this panel discussion today. I had the chance in 2010 when we hosted the Muskoka Initiative, hosted the G8, and Stephen Harper, Prime Minister Stephen Harper's signature initiative was the Muskoka Initiative. Had a chance to get really engaged in our efforts as a Conservative government to tackle then Millennium Development Goals 4 and 5 around maternal, newborn, and child health. So saving the lives of kids under 5, saving the lives of mothers in and around childbirth. And as I was working on that and became passionate kind of as a communicator first, talking about the program, and then really developed a passion for it, really noted the connection between these initiatives that we were tackling and girls' education. I had the chance to take a few trips, 3 trips to Africa, and to see some of the things that we were working on. And so many times I was meeting girls that were the same age as my daughter. My daughter's now 21, but then a teenager, maybe 16, 17-year-olds who had 2 or 3 kids already as a result of things like early forced marriage, being married at 13 years old to someone much older than them, forced into marriage, and then obviously taken out of the education system. And just tackling the scale of this problem as Conservatives, I think that we can be just as passionate about girls' education as we were around maternal, newborn, and child health. We've got a problem that is very measurable, about 130 million girls out of school, 30 million of those in primary levels. And just excited to hear from the distinguished guests on this panel a little bit more about that, and perhaps at the end, maybe give a few thoughts on that as well. But thank you so much for including me in this event, and with that, we'll look forward along with everybody else to what the panelists have to say.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to have you on with us today, and we're really looking forward to the future work that we'll be doing together. I want to start with our Parliamentary Chair, and the reason why we have this event, and the reason why we've assembled such a great cast of people. How would you explain your role as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education, and what are your top priorities, Helen? Ooh, Helen, you're just on mute.
Oh, there's always one, isn't there? Forgive me, team. But just to start off with, thank you so much, Paul and Sunil, for organising this great event tonight. And it really is an honour to be sharing the virtual platform with of course, Kim and Patricia and Mike. So I've been looking forward to the meeting all week, and it will be wonderful to hear what everyone has to say this evening. I'm hugely honoured to be the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for girls' education. I received that phone call in January, and for those of us who are MPs, it's quite a special thing when you pick up the phone and you see the Prime Minister's name. Of course, with Kim, she was the one making the call, which is slightly different. But when you're on the receiving end as an MP, you're either in a lot of trouble or it's maybe some good news. But it was good news, and I think he's given me the greatest job and the greatest opportunity. I've been doing it 3 months. I totally love what I'm doing, but there is an awful lot of work to be done. The role is very much about taking his message out globally, that providing 12 years of quality education for every girl on the planet is one of the best ways to tackling many of the mega issues facing the world today, like poverty and climate change and inequality. Investing in girls, as we all know, is an absolute game changer. A child of a mother who can read is 50% more likely to live until the age of 5, twice as likely to go to school themselves, and 50% likely to be immunised. So investing in girls is absolutely essential for women and girls, who make up 51% of the population, but also for levelling up society, boosting incomes and developing economies and nations. So it's a really serious issue. My priorities, I have to say, this year are driven by some major events that we are hosting or co-hosting in the UK in 2021. We've got the G7 summit coming up. We have the presidency this year, and that is coming up in Cornwall in June. We have the GPE, the Global Partnership for Education Financing Summit. That will be a 2-day event on the 28th and 29th of July in London. And we then have the COP26 at the end of the year in Glasgow, up in Scotland. And I see all of those events as a major opportunity to shine the light on the transformative impact of girls' education, what it can really do and what a difference it can make, as well as making sure we get the political and the financial commitments that need to go with it. So big year, lots of opportunities. I need to land them from a girls' education point of view and make sure we get what we need. In addition to that, our Foreign Secretary has also set 2 very important global targets, and the first is to get 1/3 more girls reading by the age of 10, and to get 40 million more children in primary and secondary school in low and middle income countries by 2025. So they are global targets requiring, of course, a global commitment, but we are showing pretty serious leadership on getting these out and talking to G7 members about them. So it's going to be a busy year, some big priorities, but I've got a wonderful job, but with an awful lot to do.
I think this is a question, I suppose, for everyone here. Are you all worried about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has had on girls' education across the globe?
Is that to me, Sunil, or is that to another member of the panel?
We'll start with you, Helen, and then it'll be good to get Kim's thoughts and Dr. Watson's as well.
Yes, I mean, we're extremely worried. I'm personally extremely concerned. Even before the pandemic, we had a learning crisis, most definitely, but the pandemic has made everything considerably worse. We reckon it's the largest educational disruptor in our history, affecting in the region of 1.6 billion children at peak last year in 2020. Many of these children are girls. Many of them will never return to school or start school. And we all know too that, you know, out of school girls are at extreme risk of suffering all sorts of other issues too that Mike mentioned at the beginning. If children aren't in school, if girls aren't in school, then there's more likely to be violence, sexual violence. They are at risk of FGM, child marriage, forced marriage, human trafficking. So there is, I think, a very real risk of a lost generation of girls because of that. And I think we need to work very hard, and we need to work together to prevent that from happening. And that's why I believe that panel events like this that bring us, parties together who believe in girls' education together to get us talking about it are so very, very important at this particular time.
If I can weigh in a bit, I would just say echo, first of all, everything that Helen has said. And just also for those who are watching, with Helen and Mike, I mean, it's a very interesting reflection on the kind of work that members of Parliament do that doesn't always get a lot of headlines. And, they don't just sort of show up to go to the House and cast a vote or get on their Zoom to cast a vote or whatever they're doing these days. That there is really important work that members of Parliament dedicate themselves to very often internationally in connecting with other parliamentarians and other organizations. So I was very interested in Mike and hearing what you're doing and how what you're doing. I think it's extremely, extremely important. And, we know that, Pew Research has said that the single most important indicator of the social, political, and economic development of a country is the status of its women. And so when women get put back by not having an opportunity to go to school and often being disproportionately affected as young girls with the disruption in education, it's very worrisome. But it's also an interesting example of how valuable it is to have women educated, because if you think of the number of children around the world who've had to do their schooling from home, and if their mothers are educated, the chances of their being able to continue some kind of positive learning experience is very much greater. And I was reading, I think it might have been The Guardian or something I was looking at today, talking about why we should all plant oak trees. And they were talking about why oak trees, among all the wonderful trees that grow in the world, are so important, that they have many more birds that they foster and life forms they foster, and how incredibly generative they are in terms of the environment. So if you have space, run out and plant an oak tree, but they do take up a lot of room. But in a way, an educated woman is like an oak tree, that an educated woman not only makes sure that her own children are educated, but she's in a position, if you think about what it means, not to be able to read and understand the directions on medication, not to be able to find out things. Being educated isn't just being able to read, it's learning how to find out things. And so when women are educated, given the role that they play in their homes, whether they have a career or not, they are a huge resource, that they're an incredible source of strength. And so it doesn't surprise me that the education of girls is seen as so fundamental and foundational to social, political, and economic development and progress. And so it is very, very worrisome that we're seeing girls put behind. And just one last story. I once was at a philanthropy conference in Singapore, and the UBS sponsored, I think, and I'm sitting there at a meeting, and a man sat next to me, a Chinese man, and he said to me, I think his name was Mr. Chung, he said, "I'm the president of the WTO." And I knew that the only WTO I knew was a World Trade Organization, and I knew he wasn't the president. So I was about to say, "And I'm Maria of Romania," but he handed me his card that said World Toilet Organization. And he was a man who had made some money, and he was looking for what philanthropy he should get involved in. And he decided that sanitation was fundamental, that it was so important for so many reasons. And one of the really interesting dimensions of it is that where there are no private, safe toilets, girls don't go to school. So when we're thinking about the education of girls, we have to look at what are the other barriers in countries that even if people think, oh yes, it's great, girls go to school, what are the other things that keep girls from being able to go to school? And I think that is really important. And we could talk about that a little bit more in the next round. But I was going to say that in Canada, one of the things that that the government has established is what our now finance minister, but former foreign minister, described as being a feminist foreign policy. And one of the things was to think about what are the dimensions of our aid policy, our interactions with other countries that bear directly on not just the rights of women, but the ability of women to achieve those rights. And often there are barriers and problems that get in the way of even the best of intentions.
It'd be good to hear, Dr. Watson, your sort of thoughts on the COVID-19 pandemic impact, especially, I don't know, you're sort of based in South Africa, what kind of impact that's had?
The impact of COVID-19 on schooling is yet to be fully seen in numbers, but we have very early indication that it's pushing back many of the gains that we've made in trying to establish a reading school-going population, as well as young women and boys who are able to push through the 12 years of learning. And what COVID has done for us as a sector is to, as Kim has pointed out, prioritize the absolute importance of sanitation and water on school properties. And what it's forced us to do as a country is to prioritize those basic services. And in some ways, we've been able to catch up on some of the backlog in those areas because of the necessity to implement COVID protocols. Another big area that has been surfaced because of COVID is the digital divide. And while we might as a country have a ubiquitous uptake of cell phone devices, for example, what we found was the unequal distribution of Wi-Fi infrastructure in the country. So, and also where there were devices in homes, those devices were competed for, because parents were working at home, and as a result, you stood in line for it. And I think we can be pretty sure that the girl child was at the back of that line. So what we're seeing is that the opportunities for online peer-to-peer collaboration are definitely disproportionate. There's much more I could say on the impact of COVID, and I'm sure when I get to share my presentation with everybody a bit later, I'll be able to speak to the alarming consequences of the lockdown and its impact on gender-based violence, and how we've got very early signs of horrible consequences of being locked down with people or family members who don't respect your body integrity. Yeah, thank you, Sunil.
Thank you for that, Patricia. I think it'd be good to sort of see the impact the UK support is having on girls' education across the world, from yourself, Helen, to sort of get that understanding of what the impact UK is having on girls' education.
Sure. Well, I think the impact that we're having is considerable. I think we're showing leadership, and that leadership is coming from the very top. As many of you will know, we have the presidency of the G7 this year, and our Prime Minister Boris Johnson has put girls' education at the very heart of the summit, in the hope that the transformative impact of girls' education, which we all are aware of, will, as I mentioned earlier, get the profile and priority that it needs and deserves, as well as those financial and political commitments. So I think that's an incredible opportunity. It's something that's very close to the Prime Minister. And we're going to have the G7, the leaders, with us, so we can really shine a spotlight on this critical issue, and we can see where it goes. In addition to that, going back to the leadership point, our Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has set these 2 global targets to get 40 million more children in school by 2024, and a third more children reading as well. In low to middle income countries. Again, these are global targets. They will require a global response. but he's putting the target out there and saying, look, that's what we've got to achieve. That's where we've got to get to. And that's in addition to getting all the children that have not been in school back in school, and then 40 million more on top of that. So it's a very ambitious target, but I think the situation demands that it is. In addition to that, of course, we are co-hosting with Kenya the Global Partnership for Education Financing Summit in July in London, and we will be working very hard with our international partners to raise the $5 billion that they are aiming to raise for education over the next 5 years. So it's a big, ambitious target, but again, the situation does require that. And then in addition, and again, showing leadership, we know too that you know, school and education is not just about learning interventions, and this is something that Kim touched on too, and Patricia. It's about trying to ensure that we deal with the barriers that stop girls from getting to school and staying in school. And you know, it's all those issues that I mentioned at the beginning, you know, forced marriage and early marriage. And, you know, no girl should have her hopes and dreams dashed because she's forced to marry too early, or because she falls pregnant because she hasn't had access to sexual and reproductive health services. So these are things that in our capacity as one of the leaders in gender equality, we are continuing to drive through. So, you know, there are other issues too, but I think if I was to just answer in a sentence, it's showing leadership and driving these ambitious targets and shining a spotlight on a very, very pressing issue. Thanks, Sunil.
I think it's
I could
sorry, go for that, Kim.
raise a point and maybe ask Mike to weigh in, because Mike and I as Canadians, we're very lucky that we live in a country where girls not only are educated, but we now, I mean, it's actually women outnumber men now as university undergraduates, I think, since about the mid 80s. And so these are things that we don't have to worry about so much. But we have a very diverse population and many people who come from countries where educating girls isn't the highest priority. But because we have laws that require children to go to school up to a certain age, in a sense, that makes it easier to overcome some of these barriers that people are required. You come to Kenya, you're required to send your children to school. And so they learn, and we have many different kinds of experiences. And I think that when we, you know, our leaders interact with people around the world, and whether it's through G7 or I think even, you know, very powerfully through what Mike is doing in the Parliamentary Network, creating the framework of policies that can help countries get over the social struggle by creating a framework of legislation, which sort of takes it out of the realm of debate to something that where people will be required to do, and then services and things have to come to support that. Is that something that you're focusing on? You're very well positioned to do that, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, you've given me a lovely opportunity to talk about my daughter, who's just graduating with a business degree here at University of Alberta and moving on to take law. So she's been accepted into law school. So, you know, when I think about what I want globally, I think about my kids. I have a 25-year-old son with autism as well. And I want every girl to have the same opportunities Janae has. And I want everybody with a developmental disability to have the same opportunities my son has. This interparliamentary network for education that we're a part of, and Harriet Baldwin is a co-chair. Helen, you'd know Harriet well.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, I'm on the executive of this. It's a chance for parliamentarians around the world to come together. It's funded by Education Cannot Wait, which is led by Yasmin Sharif, who's just unbelievable, and GPE is involved as well. But it's this opportunity for us to come together, MPs, parliamentarians from the, you know, all countries in the world. And when we have the conversations that we have, we get to share best practices, to Kim's point, right? And so if we, you know, a big part of it is establishing legislation that's going to make sense. We can't just have quantity. I mean, the goal can't just be to get more girls to school or more kids to school. You also have to focus on the quality of that education. And so this parliamentary network, these opportunities for us to come together and share what we've learned and learn ourselves. Quite frankly, we have a lot to learn from people in other countries who are doing incredible things because their experience teaches them a different perspective that we can learn from as well, right? So it's this opportunity for all of us to come together in our various capacities and work to empower each other. So Kim, I think you touched on a really, really good point. And I just want to say, Helen, so unbelievably encouraging for us to hear what the UK is doing, in terms of leadership, particularly with, the GPE replenishment and tackling this with your chairmanship of the G7. It's just such we saw firsthand the impact that had tackling the goals that we were challenged with. And it's so exciting that you're going to take on what I think is probably a mission that will benefit the world more than anything else that you could take on right now. Because if we're not, tapping into the incredible potential that 51% of our population offers, because we're just simply not including them, the world is losing out. So.
Well, it's the best job that I've ever had, Mike. It's one of those jobs that get you, and you could work 24/7, and you would just keep going. But thank you for your kind words, and are you coming over for the GPE? Will you be in town? Because I might be able to buy you a glass of wine on the House of Commons terrace. Who knows? But if
I would love to
over,
have the opportunity if we can get on top of the challenges COVID-wise that we're facing. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and that network sounds pretty amazing. I will speak to Harriet, and maybe I can either become a member or perhaps be invited along to meet everyone and have some sort of discussion. It sounds fantastic.
I think that leads quite nicely on to our next question, which is, do we think the private sector has a role to play? And if so, what sort of role?
Who is that to?
We'll start with Helen, and then it'll be great to get the rest of you to have an impact on it.
Well, I think, yes, I think the private sector have a huge role to play. There are many vital enablers for girls' education, and one of them, and it's a big one, is having the financial means to support our girls. Interventions cost money, so it's all very well talking about these things, but interventions need to be paid for. And there was one report that I was given to look at last week, and it estimated that as a result of COVID, there's now an educational funding gap of around $200 billion per annum, and it's likely to be that way for the next 10 years. And although that there is pressure on all nations and governments to step up, even if they do everything they can possibly do by allocating goodly proportions of their domestic budgets to education, there is still going to be a gap. That there just is. So in my opinion, the answer, or part of the answer, has to be that we try to get the private sector involved in the same way as they have involved themselves with the health sector. And that really has worked. Mike, you mentioned something at the beginning about that, I think, but we need them to step up as a complete force for the good and help us. And I think it's the right thing for them to do on a societal level, in terms of improving lives and developing economies and nations. But, it's the commercially smart thing for them to do as well. It really is. If I was pitching now, I could make the business case. I think we all could quite easily, because they need, global businesses need vibrant, educated workforces. And another report that I was given, I'm given a lot of reports to read, but another one that I was given this week was basically saying that already 40% of global businesses are finding it very, very difficult to recruit employees, to recruit workforce that have the right skills, especially when we're talking about the emerging nations. And businesses need, they need the future scientists, the technicians, the lawyers, the doctors, the clever people that will drive the companies. Another issue as well, and they know it too, but gender balanced businesses, I'm sure Patricia will confirm this, are more stable, sustainable, they're more profitable, and they tend to make better decisions about people, risk and customers. And we know too, and businesses know too, of the huge reputational benefits that companies have if they are seen very openly to be investing and spending in an area like girls' education. And that's benefits in terms of clients and customers and supply chains and a whole host of other benefits too. So the business case is there, the societal case is there. And I feel very much that, education has been a victim of the pandemic, but I think it's also part of the solution too, and a solution that will actually lead to global stability, long-term economic recovery, hopefully, and a new era of prosperity. And that is exactly what businesses want. So again, a part of my job at the moment is very much geared towards engaging with businesses, talking to them, being honest with them, and saying, look, we need you. This could be good for you too. But actually, if you step up and if you work with us, we could make a difference. We could move that dial. So that's my take on business. And for sure, they have a role to play and they could be fantastic.
I think it's important to point out the private sector isn't just business, it's all sorts of ways that society is organized. And two things I would say, first of all, the first political office I ever held was on the school board in Vancouver. And it was always interesting to me how many people would say, well, why am I paying school taxes? I don't have any kids in school. And I think, well, really? You want to live in a society where, you're going to be old and you can't have a podiatrist and you don't have, a doctor. I mean, in my view, every kid was everybody's kid when it came to education. We all needed it. And one of the things I think has been interesting about the COVID experience is the revelation it has been to a lot of parents, men and fathers and mothers, about what teachers really do. And I remember seeing somebody had written on social media not long into the lockdown, I was, helping my kid with school today, and teachers should be paid $1 million a year. I mean, all of a sudden, people have begun to see what it takes to teach and what teachers, particularly with little kids, but not just with little kids, but what they give. And so I'm hoping that part of the outcome of this experience will be a greater respect for the value of teachers. And in Canada, teaching is the highest paid salaried profession. And one of the reasons why we have such a very high quality of public education in Canada is because our teachers are well educated and well remunerated, maybe not as well as they'd like to, and there's always, fighting with the teachers unions, et cetera. But I look at some parts of the United States where teaching is very poorly paid and where it's a difficult profession. And so if you don't respect teachers and if you are not prepared to invest in educating them, you will not get the same kind of outcome. So I think this has been a very interesting experience for a lot of people who in the morning, kiss their kids goodbye and send them off to school. So suddenly learn exactly what the quality of the experience, but what goes in to educating young people in a very complex and challenging world.
Such an important point, Kim. Really, really important.
I couldn't agree with Kim more. All the people that have had to homeschool their children in the last year are really kissing the feet of teachers, possibly for the first time in a very long time. And that we all know that being a parent is very different to being a teacher, and that the role of the pedagogue in shaping the child's potential is something that a parent doesn't always do well because of unconditional love. And the role of the private sector right now is, I think, very willing to look at what it means to support getting education back on track, if out of the self-interest of getting their own children back into classrooms. Because while digital learning is all fine and well, it's about the human connection. It's about warm hands and hearts that make young brains ignite and challenge and explore the edges of their knowing. We don't always get that in a digital space where landscapes, intellectual landscapes, often become flattened, allow you to check out easily. But where there's a smile and a tap on the back, you're going to check in to what's on the board or in front of you a whole lot more readily. So the role of the school as a community is something that business, I think, and private sector members, both personally and in terms of their industries, are seeing the value in a way they didn't before COVID. We went through a terrible time in South Africa where teachers were always being slagged, right? They were always being told what they weren't doing right. And there'd almost been a disengagement by parents from the educational investment in their children's day-to-day lives. And that outsourcing to the school, to such an extent, created a real disadvantage for young people because their parents weren't engaging with their learning. And when the parents had to do the learning with the child, they're very happy to give it back, but I don't think parents will ever give up total outsourcing of schooling in the same way, because they realize that it allows them to play with their children, to think with their children in a way that telling them to eat their beans and potatoes isn't going to resonate in the same way. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think we'll move on to the next question, which is what more needs to be done to move the dial positively on girls' education, and how can we achieve the targets and goals? I think I'll start with Helen on this one, because she gives a clear sort of target approach that's been offered. So, what more can be done?
Well, I think a lot more can be done and needs to be done. I've been doing this job for 3 months now. However, I've spent a lifetime in many ways in this space. Prior to politics, I was a family lawyer for 23 years. I specialised in looking after women and children victims of domestic violence, and I did quite a lot of child abuse. And as a politician, I was Minister for Women and Equalities under the Cameron government. And so I've been in this space of women and girls and the importance of the empowerment of women and girls. And I feel that education is one of the very, very best ways to empower. In this wonderful role that I have, I've been able to be briefed, I've been able to attend meetings, I've met, all of, many of the important multilaterals, I've seen many of our bilateral programs. I was in Uganda last week, looking at how we were adapting our programs to COVID-19 in order to help children continuing to learn, notwithstanding the fact that schools were closed. So I've seen a fair amount, and then it's my lived experience too. And there are a number of elements, there are a number of reflections, I suppose, I have so far. And they are this. First, I think that we all need to raise our game. We actually need to do more than we've been doing. And that's why I think that the G7 is an incredible opportunity. And as far as we're concerned, we need to rally those G7 nations to make sure we all do everything that we need to do, whether it's in the form of a collective pledge to the GPE or what, but we need to use that coming together to really get something very tangible for girls' education. I also think, again, from what I've seen, the international community need to take a more ambitious approach, and I think we need to be better coordinated. We should all know each other. Thanks to Paul and Sunil, we do now. But we all care about this, and we can all pull different levers. And I think we need to be better connected up. And I think we need to be more ambitious too. Something Mike said, I'm sure he mentioned the word quality. I think there needs to be more focus on quality education and secondary education. It's one thing to get a child enrolled in school and the child just sits there and doesn't learn anything. It's another thing to enroll a child in a school and he or she learns. They develop numeracy skills, literacy skills. So I think we've got to keep an eye on quality. Again, something that's key for me in this role, business is one, but youth engagement is another. And I think we've got to listen much more carefully to our girls in relation to what they say they want and need. I haven't got daughters like Mike. I haven't got a daughter. I've got two sons. But we've got to listen to our children. We've got to listen to our girls. They are in that space, and if we listen to them rather than telling them what they need, I think we could do a lot better. And we need them critically as critical partners to help make progress and move this dial along. And last, but certainly not least, I think we need to push our leaders to speak out much, much more, as our Prime Minister has done, on the importance of educating girls and all of the advantages, really spelling it out, not just for girls, but for their families, for their parents and for their children and for their communities and their nations. So we need our leaders speaking out and saying, this is critical, this is helpful, this is a good thing for you to do as parents, educating your girls, it will benefit. So those are my reflections, those are my thoughts on what else we need to do. I suspect the list is going to grow over the weeks and months, but those are my immediate thoughts.
Can I just suggest that one of the things that we need to do is pay attention to our narratives. I'm old enough to remember when I was a young woman, when women advocated women's issues, men would often say, let us solve the difficult issues. And then when we've solved those, then we'll turn to women's issues. In other words, women's issues were seen as kind of a frill or a kind of of secondary importance. And I think there's two things that have changed that. One, the increasing presence of women in both in political office and professional office, and the changing of the landscape to show who gets to do these jobs and therefore influencing people's opinion, but also the research that indicates that many of the stereotypes and biases about women and girls and their capacities were simply wrong. And I think I've often said that we're never going to have a more equal and just future until we have a more equal and just history. And in many cases, women and others, other non-prototypical people who've made significant contributions just don't get, their stories don't get told because they are seen as anomalies. And I remember when I saw that movie, Hidden Figures, about the 3 African-American women who had been so essential to the development of the American space program. And I was furious. I said, why don't I know about them? These are role models I need in so many ways to change my own small bigotries about how I think the world works based on my own experience in the landscape I've seen. So I think what's really important is that we're seeing some of this transformation. And it's interesting when the current Canadian Prime Minister, who's not in my party, but when he came into office in 2015 and created gendered balance cabinet. I think he was about the 5th leader in the world to do this. He was visiting some kind of a foreign country, and the leader said, you know, why did you appoint a gender balanced cabinet? Why didn't you appoint based on merit? And he said, if I'd appointed based on merit, I'd have had more women.
Or women.
But I think that's really important, is that we have a lot of attitudes that we need to change. And as women participate more, they become more natural. People are accustomed to seeing women doing things. And I think of, you know, TV shows like Shonda Rhimes' shows, like, you know, Grey's Anatomy and stuff, and all of these, you know, these doctors who are, you know, black and white and gay and straight and whatever. And I don't know if the hospitals really look like that, but it creates a kind of you just become blind to those differences, and you're focused on the drama. And I think that as we create a world where people come to accept that many of the old stereotypes and biases are just ill-founded, they're not true in so many ways, that makes it easier for us to deal with these issues. And that goes back to this question you said of leadership, that now, I mean, there was a time when leaders at something like the G7 summit, first of all, they'd all have been men. You know, Margaret Thatcher and I and Angela Merkel are the only women who've participated in those summits, where they would not focus on education of girls. I mean, this would have been seen as something, that the ladies talk about. But the fact that men, powerful men, are saying, we're not doing this to be nice. We're not doing it to be kind. We're doing it because it's essential to everything we believe in. It's essential to our social, political, and economic growth and stability. And we have to focus on this. That makes a big difference. And that's a kind of leadership that really matters. That when opinion leaders, people that, you and I may persuade certain people, but the people who are holdouts, who are not persuaded, a guy like Mike comes along and they go, oh, this guy thinks we should be doing this. Oh, maybe I should pay attention. And you may have had those experiences, Mike, where you've surprised people by the enlightenment of your views when they were expecting you perhaps not to hold them.
One of my favorite events that I've gone to a couple of times is Women Deliver in Copenhagen in 2017, and then in Vancouver in 2019, I think it was, or 16 and 19, whatever the years were. And it's actually quite, it's enjoyable to be a conservative guy at an event like that, because it surprises people. And anytime as politicians, we can surprise people in a way that kind of makes them go, that person, I didn't expect to see that person there. It's a good thing. I think we need to do that more, because it means that we're getting out of our comfort zones in a sense, and that we're, paying attention and learning things that we might not otherwise learn. And I have lots that I could say on this, but our time is limited. I just want to reinforce both Helen and Kim, the power of stories. People, we tend to get caught up in the numbers and the targets and everything else, and those are really important from an accountability, transparency side of things. But I've found in my life the power of being able to tell a story and putting a spotlight on successful young women who have gone through the education system in a given country, who can share their story and what it means to them. It's just so unbelievably empowering for young girls that would be coming up. And so not only people from the country that they're in, but people from other countries, someone like Kim, former Prime Minister of Canada, and just telling her story on how she got there, what she learned along the way, what she might do differently if she had the chance to do it all over again, right? It's just so powerful. Storytelling is so essential to getting to creating traction and vision and hope for people.
Well said.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'll pass it over to Dr. Watson. She's done a great presentation that I'll be forwarding on to our panelists, and we'll explore the presentation in greater detail at some point. But for now, it'd be great to hear some of the sort of key points about that presentation before we'll move on to sort of closing comments.
Thanks very much, Sunil, and I'm very happy to take the presentation up when we have a bit more time. But one of the points that I'd like to speak to that Mike brought up was, the importance, was it Kim the importance of legislation and having a raft of legislation in countries in order to hold implementers to the commitment of delivery. So it's not, what we're going to do or if we're going to do it, it's about when we're going to do it. And I think that in the South African context, we have a lot to gain from looking at the collaboration amongst our African partners, especially around the ISA commitments, because those commitments have committed governments to gender equality through the delivery of HIV, STI, and TB support and delivery. And then the other important lever is in South Africa at the moment that's really helping us to turn new soil is the strategic plan for ending gender-based violence and femicide. And where in this continental situation where you've got two strong strategies like that, the idea is not to go back to the drawing board, but rather to intensify the rollout and investment in the program commitments articulated in the different areas of those strategies. And the reason why I say that is because I've seen in a very, very short space of time in my own administration, where gender had for the last 10 years almost gotten a bad name, and being a feminist or an activist for women's rights was something you felt concerned about voicing publicly. And since our sixth administration, we've had gender put right back in the forefront of what it means to mount our democracy. And in such a short space of time, I've seen turnaround in the administration, for example, on gender equity targets, where we had seen a slide in reaching those targets. There's a new commitment to advancing them, where we've seen kind of almost a naturalization of patriarchy and harmful gender norms. We've seen an overt commitment now in our annual performance plan that we have to do work that allows us to address harmful gender norms and the negative impact that they have on the norms and values of a school community. And when we are given these spaces to do the work, young people feel like we are listening to them, because young people don't want to grow into adult life being fearful about their vital force, their life force, which is underpinned often by their sexuality and their awakening as would be one day moms and dads of the next generation. And so when we take on gender, we are talking to issues that are really close to young people's hearts. And where we saw this was because we weren't able to go out and do our face-to-face program delivery, we held webinars with young people on a regular basis in order to understand how is COVID affecting them, what are their issues, and into that space, we inserted what they wanted for a gender transformed world. And they've got wonderful ideas. So I would totally support Mike saying, let's get their stories, let's let their stories lead the numbers, and also let their stories lead us, because what they are seeing is often just at the edge of what we might know, because of how our experiences have positioned us. So the presentation will go into more detail to see how our government has tried to programmatically influence the space. But most importantly and very excitingly is the World Bank have just completed a report on South Africa's gender assessment and has identified the importance of expanding early childhood development and care centres and also after school programs. So what does it mean to extend the school day, to keep kids safer for longer, so that when parents come back from work, their kids aren't left stranded in communities that are often exposing them to other types of social risks. And so what we're seeing is that people are having creative solutions about what it means to not only do gender education, but enriching the learning journey so that children have even more to offer the workplace when they arrive and show up, because they've been allowed to explore things that are outside of the curriculum. So as much as we're focusing on the literacy and numeracy requirements of an educated citizen, we also need to ensure that that citizen appreciates the social justice commitments, as well as knowing how to collaborate, play, and have fun, because it's through knowing how to have fun that you're going to find that dream job, find that dream career. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Just before we wrap up, we've got two interesting questions from the audience, which I'll kind of say at the same time, and then I can put them to the panel. So the first one's from Amarine Reza, who I know's founded an educational charity herself and has done a lot of work in girls' education. Her basic question is that with regard to especially sub-Saharan Africa, where there are very high rates of adolescent pregnancy, she would like to know, can we see stronger campaigns to address the issue of child brides, giving priority to embedding girls' health in the school curriculum, and stronger grassroots programs for teenage mothers so they can have earlier access to healthcare workers? Kind of what ideas you may have for that, and perhaps what has been done in the past in South Africa, Dr. Watson, because I know a lot of progress has been made over the years in South Africa and things like that. And the second question, just a general question, is from Samuel Ennis, who asks, is the subject of girls' education something that is discussed at Commonwealth meetings? Basically, is it discussed enough at Commonwealth meetings? I would kind of phrase that as.
Who do you want to answer those questions, or is it one for all of us?
just a general one to anyone who'd like to come in on this.
Well, I just a very quick word on it. Yes, the girls' education, of course, is discussed at world meetings like Commonwealth meetings. Should it be discussed more? My feeling is most definitely yes. And in relation to the point about girls and programs, a lot of good work is already happening. The Global Partnership for Education do amazing work in this area, and there are a lot of really good programs like the Girls' Education Challenge that we run with other donors, and that doesn't just focus on improving learning for girls, but it also focuses on some of those issues that we touched on before that stop girls from getting to school and staying at school. So a lot of the help there would perhaps be in setting up girls' clubs, providing bicycles so girls can get to school more easily and quicker and more safely, free sanitary packages, separate toilets that Kim mentioned at the very beginning. So it's a combination of the practical measures that you need to keep girls learning, along with a focus on quality too. So a lot of good work, but certainly more to be done.
If I could just say that a lot of young women in countries where child marriage or youthful marriage is common, a lot of the young women themselves push against it, don't want to get married, but there have to be options. And if there is schooling and there is an opportunity for schooling, and if there are leaders in the community that urge parents to let their children get educated, because sometimes they're afraid that a girl that gets educated will be unmarriageable. And this is, a worrisome thing. They're worried about the ability of their child to be able to survive. I think it is important to know that this is what girls are often pushing themselves for, but it's pretty hard if there are no options. But and I forget what the second question was now.
Should these issues be discussed more at Commonwealth meetings?
3 years ago, when I was Justice Minister in Canada, I attended the Commonwealth Justice Ministers meeting, and the heads of government were meeting when I was in the process of being defeated in the election in 1993. So John Major called me to wish me well, but I wasn't at the meeting. But I once wrote an article for the Commonwealth magazine where I talked about why I thought the Commonwealth was important. And it's because it's almost like a mini UN in that it's representative of many different kinds of countries, North and South, well-developed, less developed. And I think that's an excellent environment in which countries who have the capacity, the economic capacity and the social development capacity to assist can hear straight from countries that need the assistance how they might be helpful and begin to develop practices of support and partnership. So the Commonwealth is a very interesting little laboratory. The UN is so huge that sometimes things get kind of lost in the shuffle, but the Commonwealth has the opportunity to be a crucible for developing useful collaborations between the countries that have the resources to help, and also but help them to learn what is helpful, as opposed to, I'm from Canada and I'm here to help you.
So to respond to the teenage pregnancy question, in our country, 30% of adolescent girls fall pregnant. They're unplanned pregnancies. And if you have a look at, who's making them pregnant, it's sugar daddies that are making them pregnant, older men. Preying on the naivety and innocence of young girls. And so we are working quite hard on what it means to work with men, so that men and boys are part of the gender empowerment programming. Because if we don't work with men, they will always be outsourcing the responsibility for the ending of GBV to women. And that's a ridiculous scenario, because they are themselves the perpetrators of that violence. And similarly, if we only focus on the pregnant girl and not on the boys and girls and their understanding of what it means to have consensual relationships and consensual sexual relationships, we are unlikely to change the behaviors of those young boys when they become young men and go on to prey on young girls. So for us, we have to do the boy work, and we keep our eye that if we're wanting to really advance the rights of young girls, we have to do the empowerment work with young boys. And in South Africa, what is quite alarming is that young boys and young girls are almost comparatively subjected to sexual violence. And that is showing us that our boys are wounded too. So in a violent society, and in a society that perpetuates the oppression of one gender over another or one sex over another, you have to do the work sometimes in not obvious spaces. So where the gender work for girls should also include boys. Thanks.
If I could weigh in on that last point, during one conversation I was having when we were talking about girls' education made a really important point that we can't completely divide the issues of girls' education and boys' education. And the point was made that the biggest threat to girls in many of these countries is uneducated boys. And so, which I think is a very important part of the equation. And then the second thing, just in terms of discussion, that second question, I think that we need to be impatient. The issues need to be discussed, but to put a twist on it, we need to start demanding action too. Too often as politicians, we get together at these global meetings and we have lots of discussions. It's time to really demand some action. And as conservatives, that should be hardwired into our DNA. That should be something that is an advantage to us, is that action orientation. So when I look back at the Muskoka initiative, and what was to me really important was, yes, we looked at these two big issues, but hardwired into it was an accountability and a transparency. So accountability in the sense that if you're a government coming and making a big promise, we're going to make sure you deliver on the funding that you promise, and transparency in the issue of if you're a country receiving that money that was put towards the maternal, newborn, and child health, and it was a substantial amount of money, $3.5 billion, I think. We're going to hold you accountable for making sure that money goes where it's supposed to go. So in this case, as we tackle the issue of girls' education, we got to make sure that countries are delivering, and then we've got to make sure that money's actually going to making an impact in getting girls in school and getting that quality education.
Thank you for that. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure having such an incredible cast of people on our platform today. This was our launch event, and we will be doing lots more work to support our fantastic Parliamentary Chair, Helen. And hopefully we'll be able to do this event in person one day. And on a separate note, we're looking forward to doing a lot of events with each of you separately. I know me and Mike have one coming up in a couple of weeks. But with that, I'd like to finish with some closing remarks from each of you on girls' education. We'll start with our two Canadian friends, Kim Campbell and Mike Blake, before moving to Dr. Watson and before closing with Helen Grant.
Well, this has been a great conversation. And just to remind what Mike has said, what a philosopher I knew used to say, that the unit of human understanding is the story. And interestingly enough, modern brain research confirms that. So telling the stories and making the ideas come to life, make them much more accessible. And I always say about the advancement of women, it's not men against women. It's women and men who get it, working to persuade women and men who don't get it. And the optimal world is one where men are able to be all the things that they want to be because they're living in a world that doesn't impose arbitrary or narrow gender standards on them. And that's the world that I'm looking to build. And as women's possibilities expand, so do those of men. And so many of the most important people in my life and the people who believed in me and gave me opportunities have been men. So this is something where I think the happiness of men is not separate from the kind of gender relationships that are in their society. And I'd like to maximize that as well. But at the moment, it's the girls who are not going to school in greater numbers, and we've got to get them there.
I often, when I'm talking to students and people, but students particularly, I focus on the fact that we've got 960 waking minutes every day to invest in whatever it is that we care about. And every day we wake up and we get a new allotment of 960 waking minutes. Some of us maybe sleep a little less and have a few more of those minutes, but I could not imagine a better use of 60 minutes or a little bit more than that than listening to three people who I've never met before, three strong women who I've never met before, and having that opportunity. I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to be included in this conversation. And I have to say, I can't wait to, I know it's being recorded and an opportunity to share this conversation with my 21-year-old daughter, to have the opportunity to hear from, again, three strong women who she can learn from, and as she's sort of plotting out her future, really benefit from. So really excited about having had this opportunity, and thank you so much for including me in it.
Dr. Watson.
Thank you, Sunil. Colleagues, Kim, Helen, what a pleasure. I'm so grateful to have been invited to the launch event, and I'm sure that together we can go so much further. There is a beautiful proverb that says we get to eat the elephant one mouthful at a time. And I believe tonight we've taken 3 or 4 big mouthfuls. So we are a little bit further towards achieving the goals of girls' education. Thank you very much.
Oh, I love that proverb, Patricia. I might have to use it, but you say it so well, so I think I may have to practice it. But it has really been a pleasure to share this platform with such special and knowledgeable and passionate people in this space, and we need to keep in touch. Thank you so much to Paul and Sunil for driving this on. These guys really do amazing work. They really do. They are very, very special. and they also have this personality and skill where it's very difficult for people to say no to them. So as a result, they always get wonderful people to attend their events. But just as a closing remark, all I would say, I think, is that the challenge with girls' education is big. There is lots to do. We have got to raise our game. But I feel we should never, ever underestimate what can be achieved if we work together, which is going back to what Patricia was saying. And I think we can do this. And if we do, I think the world will be a much, much better place. So thank you all for the time this evening. And I sincerely look forward to being able to meet you again, hopefully, in the reality and actually, and not behind this screen. But thank you very much indeed. It's been a joy.
Thank you all. We have a great event with Mike Lake actually on April 21st coming up, and an event with the High Commission of Lesotho, where we will be discussing girls' education there as well. So it's been a great chat with you guys, and I'll pass it over to Paul.
Just okay, Sunil, and thank you so much, everyone. It's been great to have you on, and yeah, definitely everyone stay in touch and keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. See you
Bye.
soon.
See you.
Bye.
Okay.